we can't tell. Yeah. I'm just curious, how many of you have had this thought, this possibility, before coming to class? Yeah. Very good. I don't know if this happens because it's people who are troubled by this kind of thought that come to philosophy classes, or if that's actually representative of the of our culture as a whole. But anyway, okay. So that's a familiar idea for many people. So let's just look back to where we got to in thinking about functionalism. How come we got to thinking about functionalism in the first place? Well, we looked at Descartes and dualism, right? The mind. How can the mind be physical, you say? But then supposing that the mind is made of a different kind of stuff doesn't help. Because how could the mind be made of ectoplasm? What is ectoplasm? And then we said, well, maybe we should be behaviorists and say mental states, having a mental state just is behaving in a certain way. And then Putnam had this objection about super Spartans that said, well, you could have pain, but your pain might not be connected to behavior at all. And then you say, well, maybe the pain is just being in a particular physical state, having a particular physiological condition in your brain. But then there's a problem that creatures with quite different physiologies could also have pain, the problem of variable realizability. So then we say, it's not what particular physiology you have, it's how you're wired up. It's not the brain state itself that matters, it's the functional role. So being a switch, all that matters for being a switch is how the thing is embedded in a bigger system. Being a pain or being a sensation of red or being a sensation of green, it doesn't really matter what physical stuff the thing is made of. It just matters how it's embedded in a bigger system. So whether you're having a red sensation or a green sensation, according to functionalism, is not a matter of which particular physical state it is. It's just a matter of how the experience is embedded in a bigger system. So that's how you describe functional role. For each state, you describe all the possible inputs to it and what outcomes you get for each possible input. So then, what is it to have a red sensation if functionalism is right? What is it to be having a particular kind of quale? Well, we know generally what it is. We know schematically. It's that you're in a state that, given a fire truck as input, gives saying that one's red as output. Given a blood as input, you might get that saying that's the same color as the fire truck as output. So that would be how you'd say what the sensation of red is. But suppose that your spectrum, suppose that your color experiences are round the other way from mine. You and I could still be wired up in all the same ways. The box and arrow structure that you have could be exactly the same as the box and arrow structure I have. Right? So you can't explain what it is to be having a particular color experience just by talking about functional role, just by talking about how the person is wired up. Because you can keep the box and arrow structure the same between you and me, but vary which colors we're experiencing. Which particular color experience you're having is not a matter of functional role. You're getting this experience when you look at the Campanile. I'm getting this experience when I look at the Campanile. But when we look at the Campanile, the ways we respond to the colors could be exactly the same. So you can't explain color experience as a matter of functional role. Functionalism misses out that difference between your color experience and mine. The interesting thing here is that you can have an imaginative understanding of that experience. I mean, it seems so easy. That's what we started out today with. You can just imagine my experience as being different to yours. That's not hard to do. I don't even need to keep doing that thing with the color inversion, right? You can imagine it very easily that my experiences might be different to yours. But when you're doing that imaginative thing, you're catching on to an aspect of my experience that is different to the functional role. Someone said, how could you tell? Well, if it showed up in the functional role, you could certainly tell. Suppose that you and I are both looking at a fire truck. Suppose that there's some difference between my functional role and your functional role. Then you could test for that. If my colour sensation I always find a bit scary, and your colour sensation you always find reminds you of home, well, we could check that. We could do all kinds of tests that would show up where that difference would show up. But we're talking about a difference in colour sensation here that's not going to show up like that. So you can get onto this difference by the use of your imagination. There is no way in which a scientific approach to the mind could get onto that difference. This is something that is forever going to elude science. So people sometimes... Actually, let me take your question. Yeah.
Doesn't that depend pretty strongly on the way you categorize the states?
Yeah, we're just talking about... that's a topic, the way you characterize the states. So that's right, yeah.
Because if you're basically arguing that like two different mental states can be represented by the same state like on this like table, right? Because it all
That's right. That's right.
But could it be possible that like the way you're characterizing the state's not actually one state, but it's like an array of different states that have like internal variables that you're missing? Like possibly the external reaction to colors could be the same, but there could be some internal neural information you could maybe find in the MRI that would distinguish between the two color experiences.
That's very good. Okay. There are two different things in what you're saying. One is there could be some internal difference in the functional role that doesn't show up in behavior. Yeah? And the other is maybe you could get at it by looking at the physiology. Yeah? The idea that you get at it by looking at the physiology doesn't help on its own because of this thing about the octopus. Your physiology might be different to mine, but you and I might still be having the same color sensations. In fact, there are going to be variations. In fact, there will be lots of variations in the physiologies of any two people in the class. But we won't automatically say that means their color sensations are different. Yeah, so we just allow for variable realizability there. The other thing is an internal difference, right? And that really is interesting. But what could it be, this internal difference? So that's what I meant about maybe I find the color experience when I look at a fire truck scary. Yeah? Well, that would be an internal difference. Maybe I'm not the kind of guy that shows fear in my behavior. You know, trap me as long as you like, I just won't do it, right? But nonetheless, I got the fear. Yeah? That might be the kind of thing. Yeah? But it just seems so obvious that there need not be that difference between us, even internally. You see what I mean? That maybe the fear is just a result of some association with what happened long ago. Yeah? But of course, if the inversion of the spectra is pervasive enough, then I'll have all the associations with this scene that you have with that scene. Yeah. So it's not going to show up internally even. And incidentally, just contrast here these cases I began with, like expecting someone for tea at 4 o'clock. What you're getting is different to what I'm getting. Okay. Expecting someone for tea at 4 o'clock. It wouldn't make sense to suppose that your expectations are kind of round another way from mine, even though the functional role is the same. Or that the functional role of you missing Sally is the same as the functional role of my wanting a bun. These are just different. The functional role will be different if these states were different. But in the case of colour, it seems different. In the case of colour, it seems like you could keep the sensation itself the same and change the functional role, or vary the sensation but keep the functional role the same. So that really seems like a problem for functionalism. It seems to show another way in which imaginative understanding goes beyond what a scientific functionalist account can get at. Plain as day. People sometimes talk about this as inverted qualia, an inverted qualia challenge to functionalism. Like with Ned Block and this, remember this robot we had last week with 1 billion people driving it around? Yeah? That was supposed to be a case where the robot has the same functional structure as you or me, but no qualia at all. Yeah, so that's a problem for functionalism. Incidentally, at the end of last week, so at the end of the last lecture, someone came up and gave this great point against Block, which was, okay, so Block's idea is if it's got 1 billion people in it, it can't possibly be having experiences. But couldn't you make sense of the possibility that science might find out, and couldn't it be that you could find out when you looked at the human brain that all these individual neurons were themselves actually free agents? Couldn't science discover that? That you and I actually had 1 billion free agents? It's just that this whole of civilization depends on all these billion free agents that each of us has in us, all voluntarily cooperating. It wouldn't follow from that we'd shown that none of us were conscious. Right? We just have found out that, yeah, it kind of happened that 1 billion free agents can generate consciousness. So Block's wrong, because you could be having this thing driving around a robot with 1 billion people in it, but the whole thing could still be having sensations, because that might be the actual scenario for you and me. I just wanted to share that thought with you. I thought that was a wonderful idea. Okay. That seems plain enough. It is not plain enough, but it's a great idea. Okay, so how might a functionalist respond to that? As I said, there's a lot invested in functionalism because there's a sense in which functionalism is the only game in town. It's the only understanding we have of how the mind might be related to the brain. There isn't anywhere else to look. Some kind of functionalism just has to be true if the mind really is the brain. One thing a functionalist might say is, you can't really make sense of this thing about the colours going round the other way. It's just a kind of pervasive fact about the mind that there are some differences, you might say, exist between your mind and my mind that they seem to make sense at first, but they don't really make sense. One good example is how strong your desires are and how strong my desires are. You know, you say things like, I really want to do this, or I'd prefer that a little bit. I mean, suppose you and I are talking about going to a movie, and you say, I say, what about a cowboy movie? What about something with Jimmy Stewart in a cowboy hat? And you say, no, I want to see a Woody Allen film. And I say, well, I quite like Woody Allen. And you say, I cannot bear these old cowboy movies. I'd rather be dead than sit through one of these things. But I just love Woody Allen. And I say, well, I quite like Woody Allen too, but I have a mild preference for old cowboy movies. But the thing is, any one of my desires is of such titanic